This is a story about how a dress form became Josephine. What you'll need to make your own. A dress form. You'll also need to grab some WoodUbend pieces. These are hard when they're cool, but when you use a hairdryer or a heat gun to warm them up, they become bendy. Some Posh Chalk patina, Posh Chalk metallic paste and a stencil, titebond, quick and thick wood glue. You'll also need a Roycycled Decoupage paper and some Wise-Owl satin varnish. I also use various Wise-Owl paints and glazes. Here I'm demonstrating how hard the WoodUbend piece is before you heat it up. I previously attached this piece with the titebond quick and thick wood glue. You'll see me in a moment use a dry paintbrush to remove the excess glue. I continue to heat the applique and conform it around the bust line. I had an idea what I wanted to do, but I didn't have a specific plan. Sometimes I just have to try things and then see if they work out. Here you can see me adding the titebond quick and thick glue to the back of the WoodUbend mold. I did this for each and every piece that I attached. Also, heating activates the resins in the WoodUbend piece and allows it to adhere better to the surface, especially on a piece like this, which is basically made of a mesh fabric. You would want to heat your WoodUbend applique whether it is on a curved surface like this or on a flat surface. When I had previously attached the appliques at the bust line, I didn't quite heat up the applique enough, and when I bent it, it split a little bit. So here I'm doing a little touch-up. I'm adding some extra glue so that I can reheat the piece and push it down so that it will contour completely to the dress form. I'm also using a skewer to help with this because the hairdryer does get quite warm, and if you were using a heat gun, that would get super hot super quickly. Now I'm going to work on fixing the split in the WoodUbend piece. I do reheat the piece and then try to push it together, but it won't quite fit, so I add a little extra glue and continue to use the skewer and my hands. It's not a perfect fix, but I end up satisfied with it. Here's a great example of how you can cut the WoodUbend pieces. Here I'm scoring the piece that I had just heated up. However, the center is thicker than the outer edges, and I didn't quite heat it enough. So I'll have to reheat and then score some more. This is a great way to make your WoodUbend pieces go a little farther. I intend to use each half of this piece right on the bottom edge of the dress form. But you could also half this piece and use each side as a pediment, or even split it again and use them as 4 corners. There are really so many design possibilities with the WoodUbend appliques. It's truly only limited by your imagination. Here's a great example of just how bendy the appliques get when heated. And the design process continues. I knew I wanted to add a few more pieces to fill in. Now I have to decide what I'm going to use to make the hip meet the bust line. And I decided to use this large piece. It actually had a small broken piece off of the end that I used right at the waistline. This is probably the thickest WoodUbend piece I used on this dress form. And because it's quite thick, it does take a lot longer to heat up. But it really brings the design together. And now I'm finished adding all of the WoodUbend pieces. Our next step will be to add paint. I'm using Wise-Owl paints for this project, and I'm using Black Cherry in the CSP line. It stands for Chalk Synthesis Paint. This is basically a no sand, no prime paint, but occasionally you'll have to do that. This dress form is made of a mesh fabric, so the paint does not go on very evenly. But this is only our first coat, and it will get better as we proceed. Now I'm going to add a Roycycled Decoupage paper. I decide on the layout of my design and I use a paintbrush with just water so that I can tear the edges of my decoupage paper without leaving a harsh line. I need to do this along every edge of the decoupage paper. I'll be using Roycycled varnish in satin to adhere the decoupage paper to the dress form. You'll want to apply a liberal coat and slowly add your decoupage paper, one section at a time. Continue to add more varnish as needed so that you can adhere the entire piece of decoupage paper to the dress form. Typically, you would paint the section where the decoupage paper is going to go in a white. You do this so that your decoupage paper will pop. However, I really wanted the decoupage paper to blend into the background, so I did not paint that section white, and I used it directly over the purple. Here you'll see me adding a little extra decoupage paper because I cut the previous section a little too short. You'll also want to add a coat of varnish over your entire decoupage paper. Now it's time to add the second coat of the black cherry CSP paint. Again, this dress form is made of a mesh fabric, and I do believe that it's multiple layers, so it's very difficult to get an even finish on it. I am adding a little bit of paint right at the edges on the decoupage paper, and I'm using a wet rag to even out some of the color. She's really starting to come together now, though we still have more paint to add, and we will be adding lots of glazes and a stencil a little bit later too. The next color I'm adding is called Nautilus, and I'm just trying to blend a little bit of it right at the bottom and up into the black cherry paint. I am also using a water bottle to help me move the paint around. It makes a huge difference. You'll also see that I've added a little extra black cherry when needed so that I can blend each color into the other. And this process continues around the dress form. However, when I get to the decoupage paper, I am adding just a little bit to the edges and wiping off any excess. Now I'm adding a hot pink color on top. This color is called Rock Steady. And I want to blend this into the black cherry and down into the Nautilus as well. Again, you'll see where I add it just to the edges of the decoupage paper, and I use the spray bottle and a rag to wipe off the excess. Now for the really fun stuff. Here I'm adding champagne gold glaze from Roycycled. I want to hit all of the WoodUbend pieces, but I did decide to go back in and add a little bit on the mesh as well to really blend the WoodUbend piece in with the entire dress form. I'm using a chip brush in a pouncing motion to put it on, but I'm wiping off the excess with a lint-free cloth. And I continue to add this glaze along the back side, right at the edges where the decoupage paper meets the dress form. And it's the same process as I used with the paints. Occasionally I use a water bottle to thin it out and to wipe off any of the excess. It's starting to look good and I'm happy with it. Now I'm going to add some chameleon glaze from Roycycled as well. I love this glaze because it has a little bit of a pink tint, but sometimes, depending on how the light hits it, it will give a little bit of a green tint as well. I just love this one. I think it's beautiful. And I continue to layer the glaze around the edges of the decoupage paper, just as before. Most of this is a layering process. And here's a little close-up of the added glazes on the WoodUbend pieces. I thought I was happy with it, but I actually decided that I'm going to add one more Roycycled glaze. That one is called Gotham Moon. I decided to add the Gotham Moon to the outer edges of the dress form and not necessarily onto the WoodUbend pieces. This way it kind of shadows the outer edges and highlights the WoodUbend appliques even more. I could have added more WoodUbend pieces around the neckline, but I have a rosary that I made and it used to be displayed on this mannequin. However, my plan originally was to display it here again. Now there's so much going on this mannequin that I believe the rosary would be lost, so I'll have to find another display area for that. I may add some other WoodUbend pieces to the neckline later. Now I'm using the Posh Chalk Patina in Violet. It is basically a gilding wax, and I'm using the tips of my fingers just to highlight the very tops of each WoodUbend applique. This violet patina adds the perfect final touch. Here are some close-ups. I wanted to add a stencil to the left tip, just to finish things off, so I decided to use the metallic paste with a stencil. However, I'm going to say that this was not the best idea to use such a detailed stencil on a curved application. It didn't quite work out as planned. I could have edited this out, but I wanted to show you that things don't always work out as you planned, and that's all right. The stencil didn't come out perfectly, but it's still a nice detail. I didn't have any spray adhesive, and it's terribly difficult to use a stencil like this on a curved surface without a spray adhesive. The Posh Chalk metallic paste can be heated, and they will pop and give even more of a three-dimensional effect to the paste. However, I didn't put this one on thick enough for that effect to happen. Here she is in her final glory. Thank you, Jeff, from Alexandria, Louisiana, for her name. I believe Josephine fits her perfectly. All products can be found in my booth, Louisiana Creations by Gingy, at Flock of 5, 217 East Thomas Street, Sulphur, Louisiana.